I'm Shannon Watkins with the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. I am here today with Professor Stephen Porter. Professor Porter is a professor in the College of Education at North Carolina State University, where he teaches graduate courses in statistics, causal inference, and workflow of data analysis. He is here today to speak with me about a lawsuit he is filing against NC State for violating his constitutional rights. Professor Porter is also here with his attorney, Samantha Harris, who previously worked at the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education and now runs her own law firm. Thank you both for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so,
yeah, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So to get started, Professor Porter, how long have you been a professor at NC State?
That's a good question. I think I'm in my 11th year. I have to look at my vita.
A good amount of time.
Yes.
So in a recent blog post that you shared with me, you wrote that you are a political conservative.
Correct.
And have, quote, been targeted by the woke mob at NC State. In one instance, you list a number of instances where you've been targeted. And one of them, you said you were attacked by fellow colleagues for questioning a proposed teaching evaluation item on diversity. Do you mind sharing with us what that item was?
I'd have to look that up, but it was basically, I'd have to look up the exact wording, but it was basically something along the lines of were issues related to diversity addressed in the course, which is very different from all of our other teaching evaluation items, which basically address how the course is taught. You know, was the instructor prepared? Was the instructor easy to communicate with, things like that. And so I'd raise a series of questions about having this content-based question used in our teaching evaluations during a department meeting when a college representative came by and announced that this was a potential new question.
Okay, thank you. So you've been critical of other kind of social justice influence in the school, and in particular, you criticize a conference for its heavy emphasis on social justice ideology, and you were later called out publicly during a speech for your comments. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened and
Sure.
pressure to participate in meetings after that?
Yeah, so my research area is post-secondary research higher education, and so there's a major conference called the Association for the Study of Higher Education. And a colleague of mine had sent me a little analysis he'd done, excuse me, kind of doing a word search for different topics in the latest conference program. And it was clear that the conference had shifted from policy-oriented or administrative-oriented research towards a lot of social justice stuff. So I posted that on my blog, and I thought it was quite interesting, and gave it the title ASH, which is the acronym for the conference. Has become a woke joke. And as a consequence, this kind of blew up on Twitter, and the president of the association, a couple of months later, during her keynote address to the entire conference, I was not there. I presume it's a pretty big conference, probably several hundred people in the crowd, put my picture up on the screen behind her and sort of castigated me for several minutes for daring to criticize the emphasis on social justice in the conference. And then after that, there was a big push for me to have a public meeting with students and faculty in the College of Education to discuss my blog post, which I declined.
Oh, you declined. That was one of my questions.
Yes.
Like, it was supposed to air students' strong feelings about you.
Yeah, it wasn't, I had this very long email exchange with both my department head at the time, Penny Pasquet, and other faculty members who was Joy Gaston-Gales, who was the program coordinator, who were pushing for this. And I kept asking, what's the purpose of this meeting? This is a personal blog post. It's not anything involved with my work at NC State. They kept sort of repeating things about faculty and student concerns, and I kept asking, what are these concerns? I think the concern was that I dared criticize social justice, but they didn't want to actually come out and say that. So we had this long exchange, and I just sort of politely declined and said, I'm happy to meet with any faculty or students who want to come by my office and chat about this. I'm happy to do so, but I don't really see the point of a public meeting addressing my personal blog post.
No, understandable. So you also list, it seems like there are like a series of events that have occurred over the last, I don't know how long
It's 3 years now, I think. This has been going on.
Okay, so this hasn't been for your whole, thankfully, your whole tenure at NC State.
No, I mean, if you think about it, this whole woke movement really didn't take off until a few years ago. And so I think most academics would agree privately, if not publicly, because most people are kind of scared to speak out, that they would say that academia really has changed quite a bit in the past 5 years.
Agreed.
That 5 years ago, you could say something that, for example, we should have colorblind treatment of students, and that would be seen as relatively controversial. Nowadays, you'd be labeled a racist for saying something like that.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's absurd. So do you mind sharing, like highlighting a few of the other instances where you feel like you were targeted?
Sure. Don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I was removed against my will from a master's program that I was associated with, a higher education master's program. After that, I was told that I was still a member of the PhD program. And I should add that I teach in a department where we don't have any undergraduate students. We just have master's students and PhD students, basically people who are looking, adults who are looking for a credential, either a master's or a PhD for their career. And so even though I was told I was a member of the PhD program, I was not allowed to attend any meetings in which PhD topics were discussed. They told me, well, that's just a meeting for the master's program, but I could talk to faculty about what occurred in that meeting. It was clearly that there was a meeting to address both master's and PhD topics. So I was kind of shut out of faculty meetings for a couple of years. I was threatened with the addition of a 5th course to my teaching load, which, if you're not familiar with the way research universities work, it's very unusual for any tenured faculty member to teach more than 4 courses a year. Certainly, to my knowledge, no one is being taught in my college, is being required to teach a 5th course against their will. They might do it voluntarily if a colleague is ill at the last minute at the beginning of the semester and they need to take on an extra course to help students out. They have held off on doing that when I challenged that by filing a grievance, but it's still on paper in my personnel file, and it's still kind of hanging over my head. And every semester, I'm kind of waiting to see whether or not they're going to make me do that. So that's the kind of just, it's sort of this process where they try to wear people down. They know they can't fire me outright because I have tenure. I have an excellent record. I have excellent teaching evaluations. I've got a good, strong research record. I do lots of service. My annual evaluations have been fine. Up till now, my post-tenure review has been fine. And so instead, it's sort of like this death by 1,000 cuts. They are trying to seek many different ways to make my life as miserable as possible.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that. And you have, you believe this is because of the views that you've expressed publicly?
Yes, I do.
Good. So also in your blog post, you note that the university violated your First and 14th Amendment rights. If you don't mind, Samantha, could you remind our viewers and readers about what rights are protected under those amendments and how the university's actions are violating Professor Porter's rights?
Sure. So the public universities are considered instruments of the state, and through the First and 14th Amendments, state entities are required to uphold First Amendment rights, which include the right to freedom of speech, right to freedom of the press, and so on and so forth. So when a state institution retaliates against a public employee for speaking out on a matter of public concern, this raises First Amendment issues. And, Professor Porter, speaking on his blog, was obviously raising issues of public concern. And so any retaliatory action that a school takes against him for that violates those rights.
Excellent, thank you. So tell us, either of you, tell us a little bit about the lawsuit. When was it filed? Is there a projected timeline? And is there anything, any other details about the content of the lawsuit that you would like to share with us?
I'll let Samantha handle that.
All right. Yeah, I'll take this one because, unfortunately, a lawyer's job is very often just to be kind of a wet blanket and say, oh, we can't discuss that. So we can't talk obviously about any kind of litigation strategy. The
Mhm.
suit itself was filed a couple of weeks ago, but there's a decent period of time then that the other side has to respond. And so we are just in that period of time now. And at some point a schedule will be set for motions and discovery and things like that. And there is the federal courts maintain a database called Pacer, where you can track lawsuits. The dockets are publicly available. So, for example, the complaint, although I know that Professor Porter has also posted a copy of it on his blog, that complaint is available, is public, and is available through the federal court's website. So, as additional information becomes available in the case, I'm sure Professor Porter will be writing about it, but it will also all be publicly available on the websites of the federal courts.
Excellent. Thank you. Definitely will be following your case, Professor Porter. So I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. You said that these issues of viewpoint discrimination, censorship of your views, or retaliation for views that you've expressed started around 3 years ago. Does that coincide with observations that you made on your blog, or?
That's a good question. For quite some time, I've been kind of mocking the social justice movement in higher ed on my blog. Kind of one of my taglines is academic fascists when this started coming out over the past few years. This really started when we had a new department head come in 4 years ago, Penny Pasquet, who's a big social justice warrior. And so it's really, I think, kind of those two events where not only do we have a big social justice leader come into our department, but also, as we talked about, there's been kind of a big change in the atmosphere of higher ed of what seen as acceptable speech
Yes,
by some people.
Yes, no, agreed. You had said on your post that, is it true that she has moved on from that role, or?
That's correct. Yeah, she left 2 years ago, I think now. It was July 2019 when she left. And so we have an interim department head now, John Lee, who's continued. He's the one who's actually prevented me from attending the faculty meetings where the PhD program was discussed.
And now on that subject of the PhD program, you noted that they were taking away slowly resources from that program, and that there was a new program that existed side by side with it that you're not a part of. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, in fact, I have to look up the name of the program here on my computer. It's so the original higher education program was simply called the higher education program, and I should say that basically in our department we have several different program areas. They're basically specialties where students can specialize in. We have a specialty in counselor ed. We have a specialty in adult education. So last year, the higher education faculty, particularly the ones who are very much into social justice, decided to break away and form another specialization called Higher Education, Opportunity, Equity, and Justice, which for all intents and purposes is basically a duplicate of the current higher ed program. The whole notion is kind of absurd that we would have two program areas in one department focused on higher ed. In fact, the adult education program, at one point a couple of years ago, our dean was pushing us, for higher education and adult education, to merge for efficiency sakes, because at most colleges of education, there's really only one specialization devoted to anything post-secondary. So now we, in essence, have three specializations in our department focused on post-secondary areas, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't. And how has that affected the program that you participate in?
Well, I mean, we've a bunch of faculty left, so now we really have two full-time faculty associated with the program. Again, this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but we ran a big recruitment weekend where people would come in, students would come in, prospective students, to interview for assistantships, and now we're being told that we cannot participate in that. That's basically being taken over by this other program area. And so we're a little bit in limbo right now, trying to figure out how we're going to move forward for the future.
I see. And remind me, you had also has said that one of your colleagues, I don't know if it was the department chair at the time, was more or less trying to get you out of, was it the master's program?
Yeah, that's correct.
And possibly with the end goal of ousting you altogether from the university?
Well, it was Penny Pasquet. Back at that time point, we treated the two programs as one, and she wanted me to step away from both on a couple of different occasions, and I, declined each time. And yeah, I mean, it was clear she wanted me out, and it was clear, I think, because of my political views.
Mhm. I am curious. The Martin Center had learned about some diversity training that was taking place at NC State last year. Was there any mandatory training for professors to take?
That's fascinating because I pushed back on that as well. Yeah, there was this kind of absurd training, diversity training, that claimed to be based on the science. It's a great idea. I'm sure they're making millions selling this to universities. And yeah, we were told it was required at the beginning of the year. And so I participated in the training, which you have to sit and watch these extremely long videos. But part of the training was you have to take quizzes on the content. And so I failed the quizzes because I think there was content in there that I disagreed with, and it's basically requiring me to make statements that conflict with my beliefs, what the quizzes did. I recognize the university can force me to, as part of the training, to sit down and watch a video as an employee, but it's very different to force me to make statements that conflict with my beliefs. So I failed the quizzes, and I decided to just let it hang and see what happens. And I'm curious, did you all push back with the university on this or raise questions?
So I had viewed the diversity training that was required for undergraduates. I don't know if that was different for faculty, but I did notice that there were especially 3 occasions where you had to you had to agree with a very specific idea in order to progress. And if you did not select that answer, you're unable to progress and therefore unable to complete the training that at the time students were told was mandatory. The university later retracted the mandatory aspect of that.
Okay.
And so does that
well,
sound?
It's interesting because I'd like to know more about what happened, because I wonder if I was not the only faculty member who kind of pushed back. Because at the end of the year, then I got this email basically saying, hey, we're going to end the contract with them. It's your last chance if you'd like to do it. There's some sort of phrasing that made it suddenly sound like it was voluntary. And I'm like, well, that's interesting, because I was kind of waiting for the Office of Equity and Diversity to kind of reach out to me and say, hey, you've been a bad boy. You haven't completed training. And so I emailed and I said, I'm confused because I thought this was mandatory. You're telling me I'd just like to know before this thing ends what's going on. And they said, no, it's voluntary now. So I thought maybe it was me or other faculty, but maybe it was you all that caused them to kind of backpedal on that, because it was kind of absurd. I mean, like I said before, if the university wants us to sit down and watch videos, it's hard to argue that we shouldn't have to do that as employees. But it's very, very different to force someone to make statements that conflicts with their beliefs. That's to me is just uncalled for.
No, absolutely. I agree. In the case of faculty, I am unaware. I didn't actually know, I don't think I knew that they had also backtracked the mandatory aspect for faculty. I know for sure for students, because I was able to take screenshots of their website when it was mandatory, and then they subtly, discreetly changed the language on the same site, saying that it more or less it was voluntary at that point.
Yeah, they do a lot of tricky things, at least on the faculty side. You get these mandatory these emails saying you've been signed up for this training, and it makes it look like it's mandatory. And you really have to poke around a bit and realize, wait a minute, I don't really need to do that, because we do have some mandatory training. For example, if you have grants during the summer, you have to take a mandatory training on how to handle summer salary to make sure you don't break any federal rules. But yeah, that's fascinating. That's good to know. I was curious what happened. I thought surely this hasn't changed simply because I failed the quizzes. I had assumed there was some pushback from elsewhere, but I wasn't exactly sure who else had pushed back.
I think there was some pushback. I think we had raised some concerns and it might have gotten around. That is what we speculate, but we don't exactly know who.
Well, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Well, those are all my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to share about your case, about what's going on with you at NC State?
No, just that, one of the reasons I'm doing this is not just to kind of restore to my job to where it was several years ago, but really to be an example for other people that, you know what, we do have the right to stand up for our rights to free speech, and we should. And other individuals, whether they're in academia or outside academia, need to start standing up and pushing back.
No, I agree, and I think it's very admirable for you to do so. It
Thank
helps.
you.
It sets a good precedent.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Professor Porter. Thank you,
Thanks.
Samantha. I appreciate your time.